Thank you, Sam. Thank you for the words of introduction. I'm going to present today the paper that you've seen on the way in, and hopefully those online listening can access through the ODI and CDKN websites. Two comments just by way of introduction. The first is that this is a guide for decision makers, responding particularly to a set of demands that we were hearing from developing country governments who were saying to us, well, actually, in negotiating the HFA2, we have a new set of negotiators coming to the table. Maybe some of them are not DRR specialists. They sit in our foreign ministries, they sit in our home offices, different departments in different governments around the world, and may not be the national level focal points for this, may already be negotiators on other agreements, but need to be got up to speed quickly. And so it's responding to those kinds of demands for a product, for some training materials, for some information that allows that to happen. So that's first and foremost why we did this. I think the second aspect is, as Sam mentioned, we are aware that the DRR agreement, the hopefully to be signed in Sendai in Japan in 2015 in March, does pave the way for the other agreements that follow. And I think importantly is also an issue that connects the other two agreements very clearly. In the post-2015 development goals, it sits there at the moment, pending discussion this week, as 8 targets spread across 6 goals, very much in the fabric of the agreement. And within the climate change negotiations, a key dimension of adaptation and of loss and damage. So I think it's really important that the first kind of issue on the agenda in 2015 is one that does bridge those other two agreements, and therefore means that we need to get it right, and we do need to set the tone. So today I just have a few slides just to describe what is in this guide, and to then highlight some of the recommendations or issues that we here in ODI and at CDKN think are important for the HFA2 agreement. Just also probably before I get into the detail, I want to say a big thank you to all those in the team here at ODI, across CDKN, particularly to the Asia team, and to others who've contributed to this guide. It's actually been quite a lot of hard work, particularly on bringing the evidence together, and therefore recognising everybody's kind of late nights and early mornings to pull this together. So thank you to the group. So what it does, this guide is intended to break down the HFA into HFA2 agreement into a set of modules that give guidance on what could be included. These modules, you see them here, 7 of them, making the case, the architecture, financing, disaster risk reduction, vulnerability inclusion, climate change and disasters, conflict and fragility, and stakeholders and leadership. So pulling together some of the big chunks, at this stage not comprehensive, and one of the things that we want to invite people to do is to give us feedback on what's missing, what could be the additional modules that we add. We see this as a work in progress. Let me just take you through then how the modules are structured, give you a sense of what we've pulled together here. So this is an example of the module on conflict and fragility. So we have a key message there up at the top left. We have a set of infographics for each module that try to bring forward the evidence for why is this important. What have we seen over the last decade in disaster risk reduction, in the impacts of disasters that make this an important issue for consideration? We provide a set of summary recommendations for each module, a set of recommended reading if you want to understand more about this topic, and then I think quite usefully how this particular issue was featured in the first HFA, and what's been said about this issue in the key guides, consultation documents, statements that have been made in the lead up to HFA2. And that gives it a little bit of context, provides reference material, and means that you don't necessarily need to go back and dig through all that material in order to be able to get a snapshot of where we stand. I also hope it provides some guidance on what's changed over the last 10 years. And I think where we highlight that there are gaps, it does help to underscore the fact that we have moved on. HFA, an important document, we recognise that, has a lot of strengths, some weaknesses. Those weaknesses need to be addressed, but also we need to recognise where the discussion has gone and the size of the challenge that we face now. What I want to do is just take you through then 3 of the modules and try and give some sense of what it is we're discussing and what we may be recommending. One that we've continually heard again and again from governments is, are the 5 pillars of HFA1 the right 5 pillars, or can we keep them, or do they need to change? I think the message from the ODI team here and from CDKN is that we do not think the 5 pillars that currently stand in the HFA are right for the HFA2. I think we're concerned that they silo the issues. They do not provide an intuitive guide to disaster risk management now. They do not necessarily incorporate all the kinds of information that we'd like to see, and therefore we recommend a new formulation. The formulation here we're suggesting is essentially around DRR at the core of sustainable development. The statement that we make as the kind of key message that I'll just quickly read is, the successor to the HFA has to build on its successes and learn from its weaknesses. Above all else, it has to situate DRR within sustainable development. Every aspect of its articulation and implementation should focus upon supporting and improving development. It is through the development process that the reduction of risks will be maximised and the creation of new risks minimised. Therefore, we've presented this as a set of gears, of cogs that have to work together. 3 key dimensions: inclusive risk governance, resilient development, and managing residual risk. And those 3 aspects supported by 7 key building blocks or cross-cutting dimensions, which include things like recognition of the integration of DRR in other development frameworks or in international frameworks, the fact that risk assessments have to provide a foundation to decision making, the fact that we need to measure progress around DRR outcomes, not just around processes, the fact that we need financial commitments, the need for accountability and transparency, inclusion, the list goes on, and we spell it out in quite short, brief detail here, but this is certainly going to be one of the big talking points as governments meet in Geneva in less than a month's time now to discuss how to take forward the HFA2. Second one I want to pick up is on vulnerability and inclusion. An area where we actually dedicate most space to in the guide. We think this is absolutely critical. We look at 4 key aspects around women, around age, around disability, and I forget the 4th right now, but we try and highlight evidence around 4 key messages we think need to be picked up. First is that disasters exacerbate vulnerabilities and social inequalities. And there's an awful lot of discussion in the DRR community about economic losses and the scale of economic losses, and $200 billion a year gets quoted a lot. Now, of course, that data really is about insured losses in rich countries. It skews and minimises the discussion about the impacts of disasters on economic growth and on livelihoods in poorer countries. And if you actually look at economic losses per unit of GDP, you see a very different picture. And therefore, disasters continue to exacerbate inequalities on a global scale and within countries. We think that's an important issue to recognise. Secondly is that marginalised groups are more likely to suffer the effects of disasters. I think we've known that for some time. It still is not picked up in the way it should be. Data is still not disaggregated. We don't necessarily understand the full picture, but what we do know is that women and children are more adversely affected than adult males. For example, we pick up this statistic here in Nepal in 2013, preschool girls were 5 times more likely to die than adult males. We recognise there are a number of underlying issues within societies for why that's the key, and we need to look at those root causes. Thirdly, that vulnerable groups tend to be excluded from DRR decision making, which makes them even more vulnerable. This issue of marginalisation and the fact that you get poverty traps and exclusion is a key factor in vulnerability to disasters. And again, we need to recognise that. However, when we looked at the statements around the governments provided to the last global platform on DRR in 2013, we only really found that it was 6 governments that actually flagged the specific need for inclusion of women, disabled groups, children, in DRR decision making. So this is something that, despite a lot of effort from UNISDR and others involved in global campaigns, is still not recognised at the level it should do. And for example, the elements document that's been produced by the Special Representative of the Secretary General has vulnerability inclusion issues almost missing from that document. So it's a continual area of reminder. And then finally, that we need to recognise that vulnerable groups are active agents of change. They need to be recognised as key groups in building resilience if we're going to improve this equitability and effectiveness. Final one I want to talk about is stakeholders and leadership. At the moment, there's a kind of an open invitation that's come from UNISDR for groups beyond governments to provide voluntary contributions, I think as they refer to it, in order to support the HFA2 guide, whether that's on the part of businesses or on civil society or other groups, so they could be considered as key parts of the agreement itself. I think here at ODI and CDKN, we recognise the importance of all groups working together in a coordinated fashion with leadership from national government, but recognising the important role of each of those actors in reducing risk, but also recognising that some are involved in the creation of new risks, some are involved in exacerbating existing risks, and we need to look at both of those dimensions. And so here we really start by recognising that leadership is really important in disaster risk management, but there are kind of 8 reasons why leadership can be lacking. I won't go through them all now, but that in order to address those 8 issues, we need to look at the role of each group in creating risk and in minimising risk, both national governments, local governments, big businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises, micro-enterprises, civil society, and the list goes on. We don't include groups like media or researchers and things like that, but it's still an important aspect. And therefore, I think we call on governments who are involved in the negotiation of HFA2 to recognise the role of those different groupings as partners, as key elements of risk reduction, and to try and find a way to incorporate those different groupings into the HFA2 agreement to at least give the signal that there have to be national systems for reducing disaster risk rather than just a set of individual groups working somewhat alone. But not to underestimate the role of national government in providing that framework. So just in conclusion, next steps. What next? Well, look, I invite everybody online and those in the room to download the guide. It can be downloaded module by module if your bandwidth is challenging, and it can be used module by module depending on what part of the agreement or discussion is happening. Let us know if this is useful. Is this something that is helping discussions? Is it aiding connections across government, for example? What's missing? We very much consider this as a beta version or a draft that can be updated, can be added to. For example, we are already considering adding additional modules. 3 spring to mind already. One on the connections to other agreements, so the HFA to SDGs and SDGs and climate change, how it's going to actually connect. Second one on accountability, targets and indicators, that kind of issue. And a third potentially on interfaces with the environment. At the moment we include interfaces with climate change and with conflict, but also ecosystems, environment has been raised. So there are 3 that are potentially on the agenda for expanding this, but we don't want this to become a giant compendium. This is still supposed to be something short and brief and a kickstarter to discussions. But do let us know if there's something that you would like to see or any feedback. Also, we're going to be taking this out now. This is not just about launching this in London and then dusting our hands off and sitting back, but we've already been involved in sets of discussions in regional platforms, in Nigeria at the Africa platform, Emily was at Ecuador for the Latin America platform. The Asian Ministerial on DRR happens in a week or so now, and we will be there launching this product there. and continuing on that with the PrepCom in Geneva and many other meetings. So do look out for us, have a discussion, and very willing to kind of connect and support and help whatever processes that are underway. And with that, Sam, I shall stop. Thank you very much.